Hi, this is Chris Widener, and you're listening to Awakened Nation with Brad Zales.
A huge shift is taking place on planet Earth. People seem to be waking up. Tired of the way things used to be, they are creating something brand new and changing the world we live in. My name is Brad Zales, and I get to sit down with the next generation of idea makers, the disruptors, and the game changers. Everyday people, just like you and me, from all over, who are doing amazing things. Welcome to Awakened Nation.
Chris, welcome to Awakened Nation, brother.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Good. Ladies and gentlemen, you're in for a real treat today. I've met Chris several times. One hell of a keynote speaker. You and I actually met in New York City at the National Speakers Association. I think you were getting the Lifetime Speaker Award or something, and you came out, and here's what was mesmerizing to me. You talked about nothing, and yet you talked about everything. And it was so casual. I was like, damn, I wish I was that good.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, no, I love speaking. I've always been, I started speaking as a young kid. My mom bought me a Mr. Microphone. Do you remember Mr. Microphone?
Yes, I do.
The little microphone that tunes into your radio. And I mean, my mother would walk through the house. She'd walk into the house after work and I'd go, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, let's welcome Charlotte Widener home from school or home from work. And she's like, oh, my word. But in high school, I was the morning announcement guy in homeroom, when you stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance. And then, today's luncheon will be fish sticks and French fries. And today the junior varsity boys playing, that was my job. And then I was a college basketball announcer. When I went to college, I was the in-house college basketball announcer in the basketball arena, and ended up doing radio. I've done television. I had a TV show with Zig Ziglar and, some of those kind of things. So I've always made a living talking. And one of the funniest lines anybody ever said to me, my mother said to me at one point, she said, I can't believe that people pay you to do what I told you to stop. Yep. And I said, well, it always works out.
It sounds like you and I were separated at birth because I did the morning announcements at my high school as well. With the following people, please report to room A218 immediately following morning announcements. And I've just always worked with my voice, but I'm going to read your bio real quick, but I really want to talk about this. A lot of times you run into speakers, people who use their voice for a living. They were either a stutterer, deathly shy as a kid, or they got knocked on their butt and they said, you know what? I have to choose something that is different from everybody else. And speaking is the quickest way to separate yourself from everybody else and lead the pack.
Yeah, I never really had any of those problems. I kind of figured out I wanted to be a speaker early on. I bought a book. I can't even remember the guy's name, but it was called Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is, How to Make a Fortune as a Public Speaker. Wow. And I think I bought that when I was 16 years old or something like that. And that's what I decided to do. So
there you go. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to get a pen and paper because Chris Widener is extraordinary. Let's just do it. Chris Widener has been named one of the top 50 speakers in the world, one of the top 100 leadership speakers by Inc. magazine, and one of the top 10 sales success speakers for Success magazine. He is a New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling author, having authored 24 books. Holy crap, I can barely get through my first one, some of which have been translated into 14 languages. Chris has given 2,500 speeches all over the world and was personally mentored by both Zig Ziglar, who he co-hosted a TV show with, and Jim Rohn, who he co-authored his last book with. Chris and his wife, Denise, live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Chris, officially, welcome to the show, my friend.
Chattanooga, the city that's fun to say. That's my new tagline for Chattanooga.
Been there. It's getting hot right now.
It's a little humid, yeah. But we moved here from Scottsdale, Arizona, where I just heard this morning they are in their 16th day in a row, which is a new record of over 110 degrees.
Yeah. Here in Vegas, we hit 117 the other day, and my radiator blew in my truck just as we are pulling into the driveway. So,
well, at least it was when you got home and not when you were leaving home.
Yeah, my girlfriend and I just looked at each other and go, I can't believe this. So, but yeah, we're in Vegas. It's really getting hot. So let's start at the beginning. I mean, what happened when you were a kid, you grew up normal like everybody else, or what happened?
No, not at all. My dad was the fifth partner at an architecture firm called NBBJ, Naramore, Brady, Baines, and Johansson, and he was the first guy to not get a letter. And he was their chief financial officer. And in 1969, he was overseeing 150 architects and the finances around that company. They're now one of the top 20 largest architecture firms in the world. They did the Google campus, for example. Mm-hmm. And he did all of that with an abacus and a slide rule, which is amazing to me. And in 1969, he made $90,000, which today would be over $1 million. We were living in a house that recently sold for over $3.2 million. He bought it in 1968 for $55,000. It was in Sandpoint Country Club. Life was grand until May 1st, 1970, when he found out he had cancer and died on November 18th, 1970. I was 4 years old, and that began a downward spiral. Long story short, 28 homes, 11 different schools, shipped off to live with relatives twice, once in the 4th grade, once in the 9th grade, started drugs in the 6th grade, made all my money growing up, betting the horses at Long Acres Racetrack. So you can see I was going in the wrong direction. My dad was severely underinsured. He made $90,000 in 1969, and he had $30,000 worth of life insurance. So my mom had to sell that house because she couldn't afford the outrageous mortgage payment of $400 a month. Yeah. And so I always tell people, get life insurance. You need to get your life insurance, protect your family. So I could have made a fortune as a life insurance salesman. I just tell that story and tell people they need to get life insurance to protect their families.
Wow. That's rough, because if we go back in time, I'm from the same generation, that cusp boomer. And life actually was a lot easier. But when you hear that, $400 some odd a month for a mortgage, today that's 7 times that. That's like $2,800 a month easily.
Well, wow. Yeah, except that house just sold for $3.2 million. And I can't even imagine what the mortgage payment is on it.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, it'd be crazy. Well, you decided at one point that you wanted to be successful. You decided, no more of this. You realized you were going in the wrong direction. So you embraced self-help. Am I correct?
Yeah, I became a Christian the summer before my senior year of high school. I knew nothing about God. I'd never had any role models in my life, really. But I met a youth minister at a little Lutheran church just outside of Seattle. And he took me under his wing and basically, became sort of a father figure to me. But he also taught me that there was a purpose in my life, that God created me for a purpose, and that it was my job to figure out what that purpose was. And so I ended up being a pastor for 14 years out of college. And in 2002, I resigned from being a full-time pastoral staff, senior pastor of the church in Seattle, and began to write and speak full-time. And the first job I got was to ghostwrite for John Maxwell. And I wrote his nationally syndicated column for about 18 months. And then that work turned into working with Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar, and away you go. When did you fully feel that your life was turning around? Was it right away, or, Yeah, for sure. In fact, I was a really troubled kid, and I caused a lot of trouble. In fact, my sophomore year of high school, I had 47 written referrals to the principal's office. And I know that because the principal called me to his office on the last day of school, and he held up a stack of paper. He said, "Do you know what these are?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "These are your written referrals to my office this year. Do you know how many there are?" And I said, "No." And he said, 47. I think it helped that I was dating his daughter. That was one of the reasons I didn't get booted out of school. But so anyway, no, I was a troubled kid. And so when I became a Christian, I really decided that I needed to make some changes, and that I needed to change the way I treated people. And so I went back to teachers and adults and people, and I asked for forgiveness my senior year of high school. And it was kind of the biggest story of my senior year of high school was, have you seen what happened to Widener? Yeah. And the changes that have taken place. And I tried to own it. It certainly wasn't perfect, obviously, and it still had a mouth on me. But I got out of high school. I graduated 149th out of 172 kids in my high school class. Zig always used to say, I was in the half of the class that made the top half possible. I was in the 10th of the class that made the top 90% possible. And so I got a degree in youth and family work, and I was going to help, kids. And I spent 3 years as a youth minister. And those 3 years taught me that I don't like teenagers. And so I became a senior pastor and a church planter. I started churches in the Seattle area. And I always tell people, if you can start a church in Seattle, you can sell anything. Because in Washington State, about 8% of people go to church on a Sunday morning. So it's one of the least churched states in the union. And so that's how I cut my teeth in sales.
Wow. I'm sitting here going, what? This is one hell of a ride. So
it's been a crazy ride.
Yeah. How did you meet Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar? How did that happen?
Well, I'll tell you, it was funny. The owner of Jim Rohn International had an email list, and I had a big email list early on. By 99, I probably had 100,000 people on my list, and there was a thing called Messages from the Masters or something like that, and it was emails that had articles by the most famous people, Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar and Dennis Waitley and all those guys. And I reached out to the guy who sends it out, and I said, "How do you get listed as one of the masters?" And he said, "I think you need a little further to go in your career before you can be lumped in with those." And I said, "Okay, no problem, but that's my goal. By the time my life is over, I want to be mentioned in the same breath as those guys." I started working with John, and then that same guy, he also owned Jim Rohn International. And so he called me up and said, "Hey, we want to do a Jim Rohn 1-year program, weekly emails and interviews with, thought leaders and all those kinds of things." I wrote that from October 2002 until September 2003. So for 1 year, I wrote that. And as we record this, it's July of 2023. And I just got notice of my monthly royalties from that 20 years later, still getting royalties off the Jim Rohn 1-year program. And I had written a best-selling book called The Angel Inside, which is a short little fictional story. And we sold 120,000 copies of that, self-published. And then we sold it to Random House, and it came out its first week at number 2 on the Wall Street Journal, number 7 on the New York Times. And I said to the guy, I said, "Well, why don't we write another book called 12 Pillars, and it'll be based on the 1-year program, which had 12 pillars. And we'll use it as sort of a paid promotion." So we wrote this 12 Pillars fictional book, sold over 1 million copies of that book. And in the back of it, it says, if you'd like to dive deeper into all these, join the 1-year program. And so we used it as a way to sell the 1-year program by selling them a book to start.
That's a great idea. But, deep down inside, you really brought what I would say is content that people were not only really needed, but were hungry for. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah. One of the greatest compliments I ever got was from a tech guy up in Seattle. And he gave me an endorsement. And he said, "Chris doesn't talk about vogue content. He talks about timeless truths." And I tell people all the time, I rarely read books that are by people who are alive. I like to read dead guys. And the reason I like to read dead guys is because it's proven itself. If somebody's still reading that book 40 years after the guy died, it's probably a timeless truth. It's a universal truth. We read books, people blow up and they become famous and they become New York Times bestsellers and they write this stuff. And then you find out they plagiarized it, or, they're a coke addict, or, just all the crazy stuff. Right. And then they fall from the pinnacle. And so I like to stick with people who've been around for a while.
It's funny. Jeffrey Gitomer actually said that in one of his books, Cha-Ching, I think it was. He said, if you want to have up-to-date, really great modern knowledge, go back 100 years and read those books. And I was like, wait a minute, is that it? Did he just say something really genius? Yep. In my dorky mind, I'm kind of a nerd. I'm sitting there going, hey, wait a minute, he might be right.
I won't say the guy's name, but probably the most prominent pastor of the last 35 years, impacted tens of thousands of churches, millions of people, probably sold 30 to 50 million copies of his books. And I predicted that guy's fall for 30 years. I said, there's something not right about this guy. Yeah. And literally he resigned from his church after building it to one of the largest churches in the world. And all of a sudden, all the women decided that it was now okay for them to come out of the woodwork. And they had all, the question was asked, why didn't you ever say anything? And they said, well, I never said anything because so many good things were happening. I didn't want to bring him down. Well, once he was out, then you realized he'd been molesting women and sexually assaulting women and manipulating women for 30 something years.
It's interesting. I want to get back to what you were just talking about, just before, and you talk about this incident, you could see it. There's a type of person that I've noticed, and I believe I'm one of them. We have an intuition and we see things way before anybody else does. For lack of a better word, I think it's connection to spirit that drives that for me anyways. But let's talk about that a little bit, because I really feel this separates, certain people who catch trends way before they're happening. And it's about trust as well. And let's dive into that a little bit.
I believe that discernment is a spiritual gift. I believe that women are more finely tuned toward discernment. I trust my wife a lot because while I saw that one, and I actually saw it a number of times, I think I probably was more in tune with seeing pastors who were not necessarily good guys, but I've not had the best business partners numerous times in my career. In fact, at one point, my son said, "Dad, I think your partner picker's off," and I said, "My partner picker may be off," but my wife will say to me, "I don't like that person. There's something wrong with that person." And I'm usually like, "No, he's a great guy." And she's like, no. And then you realize, oh yeah, she's got a lot more discernment. So I run it by my wife all the time now.
You're a smart man. I say that to everybody. I had a client years ago and she comes to me and she went through one hire after another. And she's a small business owner. And she kept having people betray her, fire her, and all this, or steal from her. This was the worst part. And they were, she has famous friends. These were their daughters and sons. And so we went through a whole system as I'm coaching her. And then I said, "So what have you learned from all this?" She goes, "Well, I need to do better." I said, "No, stop. You should not be involved in the hiring process, period." And so she looked at me like, "No." And so I take my hat off to you for listening to your wife, because she has that neutral barometer that can watch you outside and see you interacting with this person. And there's something off. We all have it though. I mean, we all have that one thing that we're not good at, but we're brilliant at everything else. Am I right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So there was something that I really, made my head stop and turn and look and say, this guy's onto something. You have a program called Jesus, Master of Influence. And I used to say this to people all the time. I say, "You want to know who the greatest orator in the world ever was?" And they're like, "Who?" And they're naming like Julius Caesar. What I said, Jesus Christ. They're like, "Well, how can you say that?" I said, "He stood there in front of people for 5 hours, fed everybody, and they still stayed." How many of you have ducked out of a wedding after everything? You got your cocktail, your cake, and you left. Okay. I said, people stuck around for 5 hours. And so I think it's very prolific that you came up with this program, this idea.
Yeah. It's called Jesus, Master of Influence. I wrote a book called The Art of Influence, and that's the book I've probably done the last 1,000 speeches on all over the world. And so I believe, I believe in the importance of learning how to influence people and persuade people and move people. And then, as a former pastor, I was talking to a guy. They own a publishing company and they do a lot of video production courses and things like that. And they said, "Would you do one?" And I said, "Sure. How about Jesus, Master of Influence?" Because the greatest influencer in the history of the world was Jesus. I mean, just by pure raw numbers. Even if you don't believe in Jesus, even if you don't, historically, it's hard to not believe in Jesus. I mean, it's basically been proven there was a man named Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth. He lived and died, and that it's basically inarguable at this point, unless you're just obstinate, from both secular sources and religious sources and historical, those kinds of things. But 2,000 years later, there's 1.8 billion people still follow the guy. So So it's inarguable that he is the greatest influencer in the history of the world. I mean, we date our dates based on the year that he was born. So, we still, every day that when I say to you, what year is it? 2023. Thank you for recognizing Jesus. Right. It's like everything is built around that. And so I put together a bunch of lessons on how Jesus influenced people, and the ways that he influenced people had a wide variety of ways. And so I just, it's about 10 minutes on each lesson. I think there's 16 lessons or something like that. But yeah, it was fun to shoot.
What is the one principle from that, or the one lesson that you think stands out and is the driving force behind everything? I think probably
if I had to pick one, it's how Jesus used compassion to influence people. And the story that I tell is the woman caught in adultery. If you remember that story, there were some religious leaders, and Jesus came up, and they had caught a woman in the act of adultery. Now, the first thing you have to ask is where was the dude, right? They caught her in the act of adultery, but she's the only one they brought, and they were going to kill her. The guy got off scot-free, probably because he was one of their friends. And so, here she is. She's probably naked. There's a bunch of religious leaders standing around her. She's ashamed of herself, not only because she's naked, but because she was caught in adultery and, these kinds of things, right? And so they begin to say, what should we do? And Jesus, he says, first of all, he gets down and he starts writing in the sand. Funny thing, he starts writing in the sand. He says to them, those of you without sin, cast the first stone. So he was basically saying, you're right. She was caught in the act of adultery. The law says that you get to stone her to death. Just one thing, whichever one of you is without sin, you pick up the first rock and you throw it. Now, the interesting thing is, Jesus was the only one in that group of people that had no sin. So he very well could have picked up the rock and thrown the first rock. But instead, he gets down and he starts writing in the sand. And the Bible says one by one, they left. And nobody knows what he wrote in the sand. There's been speculation. Some of them think that he wrote, sins down, greed or envy or whatever. And that one by one, they realized he was talking about them. My favorite answer, my favorite speculation is an old Christian comedian. He said, I think that he started writing the names of their girlfriends down. And he'd look at Cheryl, and he's like, oh, he knows about Cheryl. I'm out of here. Susie, I got to get out of here. But anyway, eventually it ends up, it's just Jesus and her. And he says, has anybody condemned you? And she says, no, sir. And he says, then neither do I. But then he does the influence. He says, go and sin no more. And she left. Now, we know we never hear from her ever again. But I would imagine that act of compassion, when he could have really, harmed her, it was the act of compassion. She knew she'd done it. He knew that she'd done it. Everybody knew she'd done it. And he taught her a lesson of grace and compassion and said, go and sin no more. And I'd like to believe that she probably went and sinned no more. So that's one way. There were times, that he went into the temple with a bullwhip and he was turning tables and, all that kind of stuff, the breadth in which he influenced people. But I think probably it was the compassion that Jesus had that I found the most interesting.
I agree on that, simply because, I grew up, I went to Catholic school. And then my mom became a born-again Christian. And so I followed suit. And, we went to every different church. And, my mom was a church hopper because she couldn't find that energy she wanted, which was the non-judgment. Right. That was the big thing she was really looking for. And so when you talk about this, the thing when I read the Bible is this, the rules of the Middle East at that time, and even today, the guy could do whatever they want, and the woman is the one who's the center. Yeah. So Jesus wasn't just like talking to people and getting them a little upset because he was speaking raw truth. He was going against the grain of an entire society at that time. Yeah.
Well, and you also think about how when Jesus addressed people who thought they were righteous, he told them how unrighteous they were. When Jesus addressed people who were unrighteous, he told them how loved they were. And so his tactic in these two different groups of people was completely opposite, because the sinners, most of them know they're sinners, right? You know, the woman caught in adultery, she knew, right? She knew. She was expecting judgment. Instead, he gave her grace. The religious leaders of the time, they thought that they were perfect and righteous, and, you know, and he ends up calling them whitewashed tombs full of dead men's bones. And, you know, and confronting them. So I find it interesting the way that he influenced people. He always gave them exactly what they needed, not necessarily what they wanted, but what they needed.
But isn't that what a leader needs to be? You know,
Absolutely.
I thought my greatest skill, because I had a company back in the 90s that we exploded and we went public on NASDAQ. And I mean, you know, I thought my greatest skill was spotting talent in someone else. And here was the rub, you know, the hard part. I could see things in them they couldn't see in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And nurturing that and pulling that up, a lot of times people couldn't make it because they couldn't see it in themselves. And I think that's a real talent, you know, not just Jesus, but people like you. We've all been around leaders that are bad leaders, and we know what that is. But it's hard to make that list of what great leadership is. And I feel this is the number one talent, intuition, something that you can talk a lot about. And that is this understanding of what you can pull out of a person that they can't see in themselves.
I think just believing in people. I had a lot of people who believed in me. And, you know, teachers, starting with teachers, college professors. My first mentor out of school was the guy. He ended up becoming CEO of Mars Candies. When I met him, he was the vice president of Mars, living in New Jersey. He ended up becoming CEO of Calcan, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Mars Candies empire. And then he ended up president CEO of Mars Candies. And, you know, I'll never forget when I moved out to Seattle to start my first church, I got a check from him. And when I left New Jersey, I was in a very, very, very wealthy church. And I decided that I was not going to ask anybody for money. I could have, and most people would have, but I decided not to. I wanted to see who God put it on their heart to help me. So I get a check from this guy. And I called him up, said, thanks a lot. Appreciate that. Or maybe I sent him a note. I don't remember, but I thanked him. Next month, I get another one. Thank you very much. This is really great. Thank you. Third month, I get another one. So I called him up and I'm like, hey, I really appreciate this. This is great. You know, thank you so much. But, you know, why? And he said, I believe in you.
Wow.
And I just, that was all it was. That's all he said to me. I believe in you. And I've had so many people, you know, Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, and business partners, and, you know, that have said, I believe in you. And so now at my age, I'm 57. And there's lots of youngsters, you know, 30, 35. And I try to tell them that I believe in you. Yeah. You're great. You're going to do great things. I try to let them borrow that belief, because when somebody successful says they believe in you, you're like, wow, that person's successful. I mean, he's running a $30 billion a year company and he believes in me. Maybe he sees something in me. Maybe I don't even see that something in me. And so whether it's teachers or parents or, you know, business leaders or whatever, when they tell you they believe in you, that's amazing. But when we tell other people we believe in them, that's what pushes them to greatness.
I agree with that. And it's a very powerful thing. I mean, it's as powerful as, you remember the first time your wife said, I think you're handsome. I mean, it just washes over you and you're like, well, thank you. You don't quite know what to do with it at first. But there was a great story. I had Stephen M.R. Covey on the show, and he was talking about trust and inspire. And he talked about the CEO, the new CEO at Hugo Boss. They had a 5-year plan. And this 5-year plan was aggressive. And he came in, and usually it takes about 2 to 3 years for him to go around, meet everybody and get to know them and, you know, trust what they're doing, trust that they're great at what they're doing. And the guy came out on stage and he said, look, let's stop wasting time. I trust you. The fact that you're here and you haven't been let go, you're the very best at what you do. And I trust we're going to do this together. Do you know that that simple speech inspired people so much that they are literally 2 years ahead of their 5-year curve on what they want to do? And it's as simple as what you just said. You know, if you believe in people, they take off from that point on. Have you had that in your life, or you've seen it directly, either from a speech or someone you told, or even, you know, your own kids or whatever, you know?
Yeah, I get notes from people all the time. You know, this book, I read this book and it challenged me to do this. I started my business because of this book. I reconciled with this person because of this book. So I get quite a bit of good feedback from people, and it always makes me feel good.
Well, there is something about you. I have to say that. That's je ne sais quoi. You know, when you and I were at this summit in Scottsdale, you came in, you gave just such a great speech. And you were only there, like, I think 15 minutes, half hour, and then boom, you were off. And I was just like, you know, what just happened? You know, because some people, when they enter the room, you're like inspired. You're one of those people. Now, I'm not here to blow smoke up here. You know what? I'm just saying, you know, you brought that thunder that day, and I really appreciate what your message was.
I appreciate that. You know, Zig always used to say there's people who brighten a room when they walk in, and there's people who brighten a room when they walk out. And I always decided I wanted to be the guy who brightened a room when I walked in, not when I walked out. So
you're cracking me up, because as you're saying it, I'm hearing Zig say it. You know, there are some people. You know how his voice was.
But he always added an A at the end of words.
Yeah, he was fantastic.
By the way, do you know what Zig Ziglar's real first name was?
No, what is it?
You got to pick up his autobiography. It's a great autobiography, talking about growing up in Yazoo City, Mississippi. But at one point he says, my real name was Hillary.
What?
And he says, and now you know why they call me Zig. His real first name was Hillary Ziglar.
Was that See You at the Top? Is that the book?
No, See You at the Top was his first book. Interesting story about that. This was his autobiography, and I can't remember the name of it. It's got a picture of him on the cover, if I remember right, sitting on a front porch or something. I can't remember. But interesting thing about See You at the Top, Zig did not have enough money to publish See You at the Top. He was going to self-publish it. And he was friends with another woman who lived in Dallas, and she had just started a network marketing company. Mm-hmm. And she said, you know, Zig, I'll make you a deal. How much does it cost you to print the books, to print 5,000 books? And he gave her the amount, and she said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll buy 5,000 books for twice the price that it costs you to get. So you'll be able to print 10,000. I'll get 5,000 of them, and you'll get 5,000 of them. So who knows what it costs to print the book? $1 maybe. So she paid $2 and she bought 10,000 of them. Wow. And she used them to give to the people in her network marketing company. He used it to become a best-selling author and the greatest legend in motivational speaking history. And that woman's name was Mary Kay. Mary Kay paid for the first 10,000 copies of See You at the Top and put Zig Ziglar on the map.
That is a great story.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite quotes from Mary Kay is, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm going to screw this up, I know it, but she basically said, the bumblebee is not built to fly. Its body's too fat, its wings are too small, but it doesn't know that.
Right.
And that's why she wore a bumblebee brooch.
It's a much better quote than, what if we make the Cadillac pink?
You know, my mom sold Mary Kay back in the 70s. You know, say, here I am, the only kid, you know, towhead blonde kid running around the house. And there's all these women in the living room, and they all want to toss on my hair. And I'm like, I want to run out and play, you know, but it's hilarious what's going on.
That's funny.
What are some really great business stories or personal stories that you've experienced since you've become this, world-renowned keynote speaker? Because I know I have my own personal stories of being a keynoter, and they're just, you know, from a CEO, you know, crying to whatever. But I want to hear some of your stories, because I'm sure you have quite a few.
Oh, man. You know, one of the interesting things is somebody said to me once, he said, you have lived a Forrest Gump life. And at first I didn't really know what that meant, but I have just met. I mean, really, it's really true. I'm going to write my biography, my autobiography, my memoirs, and I'm going to call it. It's a mostly, in parentheses, it's a mostly wonderful life. And I mean, when I was 11 years old, I got a job as a ball boy for the Seattle Supersonics, and I spent 7 years there. My first year, we lost the world championship in 7 games to the Washington Bullets. My second year, we won the world championship against the Washington Bullets in 5 games. And I was in a ticker tape parade through downtown Seattle with 500,000 people, stood on the stage at the age of 13 with the NBA champion Seattle Supersonics. I met everybody, Dr. J, George McGinnis, Artis Gilmore, who was the guy they called Chocolate Thunder, Daryl Dawkins. I mean,
yeah.
Magic Johnson. I was trash talked by Larry Bird in the visiting team locker room once when I was 12 years old. I was working the visiting team locker room and I hadn't changed into my uniform yet. So I was wearing my football jersey from school and I played quarterback. It had number 11 on it. And I was in getting it set up and then I was going to go over to the Sonics locker room and get changed in my uniform and then come back. Well, the Celtics got there super early. And in walks Larry Bird, the hick from French Lick.
Right.
And he comes walking in and Larry Bird is renowned for trash talking. I mean, he's the greatest trash talker in NBA history. And he would literally tell people, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to dribble to my right. I'm going to dribble to my left. I'm going to stop. I'm going to pump fake. And then I'm going to drain it. I'm going to turn around and run back before the ball goes through the hoop. He would tell people that. And then he would do it. And then he'd do that. So he comes walking in. He sees me wearing this number 11 jersey. And I'm 12, maybe 13 years old. I'm all of about 5'4". And he says to me, Number 11, that's a quarterback's jersey. You ain't no quarterback. You're too small to be a quarterback. You're just a midget. You can't be a quarterback. And I'm like, I'm being trash talked by Larry Bird. This is unbelievable. I'm minding my own business trying to make Gatorade. And this guy walks up, decides he's going to start trash talking me. So that was a lot of fun. I've met presidents and famous newscasters and sitting in a bar in Mykonos once talking to an older couple and come to find out he's the creator of Downton Abbey and he's won an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, not the Tony. In fact, his wife says to me, she says, have you ever heard of an EGOT? And I said, yeah, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony. And she said, well, the only one my husband hasn't won is the Tony. And I look at him and I said, so all you're left with is the ego. And he thought that was the funniest thing. So I said, so what have you written? And that I might have heard of. And he says, Mary Poppins. Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Mary Poppins on Broadway. He wrote the play, Mary Poppins.
Wow.
And so then I said, what are you working on? He said, well, I'm working on a movie. This was June of 2019. I'm working on a movie that comes out in September based on a TV show that I created. And I said, oh, what's the TV show? And he says, Downton Abbey. And so, just sitting in a little bar in Mykonos, Greece, and end up sitting next to this couple, started talking, and ends up it was Julian Fellows, his wife, she was the lady in waiting to the Duchess of Kent and just a member of the royal family and extended version. But no, it's been a crazy life. I've met presidents and senators, and I've run for office myself, and I've written a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling book. I've made millions. I've lost millions. It's been a crazy, crazy fun life.
That's amazing. How did you meet Denise?
What do you call it? Dating apps. In fact, for those of you who are 40 and older, we have an audio program on Audible. It's called Swipe Right for Mr. and Mrs. Right. Online dating for the 40 plus crowd. Mm-hmm. And so I drug her into the studio. She'd never done anything like this before. And so we're in there, we're in what's called the whisper chamber. It's like a giant gun safe. It's got like the fine hairy kind of siding, whatever. It's all steel, and you go in there and she's like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, just follow my lead. I'm going to, I'll ask you a question and then just talk. And for a little bit, I kind of had to push her forward to get up close to the mic, kind of like how you are, right? But after about the second or third question, she's like this. Okay. Anyway, so she's like, oh, stop. Okay. And she's like talking. And so she found her way pretty quick. But we talked about how we met online and the things you're looking for, because what you're looking for in your 40s way different than what you're looking for.
Yeah. Ain't that
I wasn't looking for anybody to have babies with. I wasn't looking for anybody, that needed to pay my way. I wasn't looking, neither was she. We were looking for somebody that we could enjoy growing old with and sit on the back porch and drink coffee when we're 80 years old and enjoy each other. So, yeah, we met online, an app called Bumble. We met on Bumble.
I've heard of Bumble.
Yeah.
So what was the first romantical, I always like to say romantical thing, you started to connect and you said, hey, wait, we have a lot in common.
Well, we went for our first lunch on May 4th, 2017. And then I took her out to another lunch 3 weeks later, May 25th. And on that one, I said, I really like you. That was the second time I saw her. We didn't see each other. We kind of texted back and forth a little bit. I said, I really like you, but I'm moving to Seattle in about 5 days. I was moving back to Seattle because my son had gotten $500,000 investment to start a little tech company, and he needed a little adult supervision. So moved back there. We spent about 100 hours on the phone and video conference and talking and everything. And I said, you know what? Let's go to Vegas. So we went to Vegas. We saw some shows. We had our first dinner together at Bobby Flay's Mesa Grill at Caesar's Palace.
Yes.
Which is no longer there.
Yeah.
But that was an amazing dinner, and we fell in love, and we got married in Italy in June of 2019. We got married in a overlooking a vineyard where the Antonari family invented Tignanello wine. Most people call it Tignanello, but the G is silent.
Right.
And we had an amazing trip. That's the trip where we were in Mykonos, and we went to Croatia and Italy and Greece, and it was just a great few weeks we spent.
That's fantastic. I always like to talk to couples on my show, especially Christian couples or those who have a spiritual connection first, because I have the same with my girlfriend. I had a divorce back in 2018, and dating when you're older is very different. People have no clue.
Well, let me tell you that, and you maybe try get this guy in your podcast. This is the best marriage book I've ever read. Denise and I have read it together 3 times, and it's called Cherish. And the premise is that when traditional wedding vows say to love and to cherish, and there's been thousands and thousands of books of what it means to love, but nothing on what it means to cherish your spouse. And it is brilliantly written. Lots of great practical advice on how to cherish your spouse. And we've read it together 3 times. We start every day together. We get up, we read a 1-page devotional, followed by a chapter from the Bible. We just go straight through. This morning was 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Tomorrow will be 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is the old one about love is kind and love is pure. And the one that you hear at every wedding. And then we read a book. We read, a couple pages from a book. And sometimes it's a self-help book. Sometimes it's a marriage book. And we've read Cherish 3 times together. Great. Best marriage book I've ever read.
I love that, man. I really do. I remember this distinctly. A friend of mine, she was in the middle of a divorce, and her husband tried to get back and, get together with her. And what the final straw was is he ordered her favorite pizza from her favorite pizzeria that she had ordered every Friday for years. They've been together for 22 years. And the pizza arrived, and he didn't know her order.
Yeah.
And it's little things like that I try to, live that dedication to who I'm with. And
you could drop Denise and me in any restaurant in the world, hand us both a menu. I will silently tell the waiter what it is that I'd like. She could look at the menu. She could pick 2 items, and one of them would be one of the ones that I ordered.
Yeah. And it's tiny things like that, man, that I really think make a relationship. It's subtle things like knowing how your spouse likes to have the heat set on her side of the car.
Yep.
It's how do you make her coffee in the morning in a way that she likes it? It's little subtle things that tell her you're paying attention to her.
Yep.
And I think this is beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I saw some of your pictures on Instagram. Sorry, I was stalking before.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah.
I do all my research before I do a show. But yeah,
we always say, she says it about me, I say it about her. You're not perfect, but you're perfect for me. And that's what you're really looking for.
it is. It's so true. Compatibility, perfect. Does this person match you is very important. So I want to ask you a question. You've met presidents. Which president probably has connected with you the most, or that you feel this is the person I'm impressed. I'm going to vote for this?
Well, I'll say two people. And I always love talking politics because half the people are going to hate me. No matter who I say, half the people are going to hate me.
Me too. I get it.
So I think my first vote I ever cast was for Ronald Reagan. I voted for Ronald Reagan in 1984 in his reelect. I was finally old enough to vote, and I voted for Ronald Reagan. And I loved Ronald Reagan because he talked about conservative ideals in a winsome way. And one of the things that I always tell people is if you are winsome, you will win some. And I believe that to be really true. And I'll tell you when I think the election was won for Ronald Reagan, when he was running against Walter Mondale. And he slaughtered Mondale. In fact, he won he won 49 states except Mondale State. Is the only state, Minnesota, Mondale won. But they were in a debate and they brought up his age. And the question was, Mr. Reagan or President, I can't remember if he ran in, 80, he ran against Jimmy Carter. So it was 84, Walter Mondale. And they said, what about age? Should age be an issue in this election? And basically they were saying, are you too old, Mr. President? But the way it was worded, he says, I absolutely refuse to use my opponent's youth and inexperience against him. And
I remember that.
So the camera is facing him head on when he says it, but they immediately cut to a camera facing back this way with Mondale in the background because Mondale was over here. So the camera was looking at Mondale's reaction and he exploded in laughter. He even had his opponent laughing. Go watch the video. Watch Mondale. He's like literally laughing. And I said, this election is over. Because he's won his own opponent over. He's winsome even to his own opponent. So I like the values and the winsome way in which Ronald Reagan was that way. Modern day, and this is going to probably, a lot of people are not going to like this. Some people will love it. But I was a huge, and still am a huge supporter of President Trump. And I'll tell you why. Because our country's in trouble. And our country's in trouble, not just from Democrats. Our problems are Republicans, too. Yeah. I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2010 in the primaries, and we were $9 trillion in debt when I ran against Patty Murray in Washington State. We are $32 trillion in debt 13 years later, more than triple in 13 years. This isn't just a Democrat problem. This is a Republican problem, Democrat problem. We've got look at San Francisco and Seattle and Portland, and look at the jobs that have gone overseas and just all these kinds of things, right? And I really believe that President Trump was exactly the kind of politician we needed. He's a bare-fisted brawler from Queens.
Yeah.
And I really believe that what we're seeing now is not a fight, in the typical terms that we see. I say we're in a fight between Queens and Manhattan. Yeah. Even though he made his fortune in Manhattan, he's a guy from Queens. And, a lot of people don't understand New Yorkers. They're brawlers. You flip somebody off in Seattle and they're like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. You flip somebody off in New York, you're liable to catch one in the jaw, right? They're fighters, they're brawlers. And frankly, I think that's exactly what we needed to try to wrest control of our country out of the hands of people who are bad actors on both sides of the aisle.
I agree with you on that. And I grew up in Pennsylvania, but I moved to New York City when I was 21, right after college. And I lived there for 35 years. I've met Donald Trump multiple times. It turned me into a scrapper a little bit. My girlfriend has to calm me down out here in Vegas sometimes. But I realize exactly what you just said. Somebody from Queens, you give him a hard time, he'll give it right back to you. And
He'll give you a right hand is what he'll give you.
Yeah. And somebody said this once, Trump is not the wonderful, going to tell you everything's roses and all that. He's the stepfather you needed.
Yeah.
To turn you around.
I want to tell you a story about President Trump. At one point, I was putting on events where we had President Trump. Mm-hmm. And we did 7 events with 45,000 people in attendance. And we usually did a breakfast with somebody, and we'd have 500 to 800 people at the breakfast. We started like 7 a.m, and we had Sarah Huckabee Sanders one time. Now, Sarah had been the press secretary for President Trump. She's now the governor of Arkansas, right, following the footsteps of her dad. Well, we did a Q&A session, and this man sitting in the front says, Miss Sanders, I don't know if you remember me, but my name is such and such, and my mother had cancer, and we were able to meet with President Trump. And I just want to tell this crowd that one of the reasons we met was because we didn't have insurance that helped us, and we were working on insurance things and stuff. And what most people don't know is that after that meeting, President Trump paid off all of my mother's cancer treatments. And the crowd just kind of, oh. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders said this, okay, first of all, I do remember you. I'm glad to hear your mother's doing well, et cetera. She said, that's fantastic. And what you just said is absolutely true. Then she looked at the audience and she said, what you don't know is that is every single day with President Trump. Every day he helps somebody who doesn't have the capacity to help themselves, whether it's writing a check or opening a door or getting them a job. And so we see this person that the press has built up to be this monster, but the people who know him, they tell all sorts of stories about acts of compassion. There's a story where it was late in the evening and his mother's car broke down, and somebody stopped and fixed her tire, and he went to make his mortgage payment a month later, and they said they returned the check, and he said, well, what would you return the check for? Well, your mortgage had been paid off. He found out Trump had paid it off for stopping and helping his mother in 11 o'clock at night.
Wow, that's incredible. And I've seen it firsthand. Everybody walks by Trump Tower at some point, but I've seen him get out of a limo and he's about to go in the door and he stops and he sees a construction crew over there and he's dressed, to the nines. He stops and he goes, hold on, I'm going to go talk to these men. And he goes over and he shakes their hand and he just starts talking to them. And I'm like, wow, I have friends, I hate to say it, you mention his name and they're spitting angry. I'm like, what are you angry about? And I realized the media had built up such a hatred for him rather than let people finding their own way to what Donald Trump is about.
Everybody loved him until he ran for office. Then everybody hated him. All these rappers, I mean, have you ever seen the video where it's like every time Trump's been mentioned in a song, and then all of a sudden they hated him. But no, I think he's exactly what we need because of the precipice we find ourselves on.
What would you say to someone on the left to convince them to listen to Trump, or at least say, you know what, this is the best that we need right now? It's not. Well,
I find it very, very hard to talk to people about it because there is just this raging hatred of him. But what I usually do is I leave them speechless, because what I'll say is other than his personality, what policy or action that he took as president do you disagree with? And it's crickets. They don't know. He's just a bad guy. He's mean. He's bad. He's horrible. I hate him. Really? Yeah. So what was it? Was it the lowest unemployment of all time for African Americans that you don't like? Was it the lowest unemployment of women that you don't like? Is it the lowest unemployment of Latinos that you don't like? Is it the fact that he's the only president in our lifetime that didn't take us to war? Is that what you don't like? Yeah. Is it the fact that he ran on pulling us out of the Paris Accord and did that you don't like? Is it that he ran on moving the embassy to the Jewish, the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, like every president since I think Carter has promised to do, and he actually did it? Is that what you don't like? What is it exactly that you don't like that he did? You know, even African Americans, you know, the Platinum Plan, he gave, I think, I can't remember, 500 million, 500 billion, something like that. I think it was $500 billion. You know, he gave more money to the historically Black colleges and universities than any other president in American history, which is why African Americans, Latinos, the Democrats are getting very, very scared because those folks are realizing this guy's good for us. He cares about us.
He does. He's not going to pander, and he's not going to sit there and, you know, do whatever. That was the first big salvo I loved because I worked for the United Negro College Fund for probably almost a decade as their creative director for their big gala award show. And my ex-wife is Black and from Haiti. So, you know, I get in there and I'm just, you know, I'm having fun because I had to do all this research into historical Black colleges and universities. And also I found pictures from World War II that would blow your mind of gunners and tank commanders who are people of color.
Absolutely.
And I just, you know, I would hear these complaints all the time. And Trump, when he got into office, he moved the money from the general fund for these colleges to the Oval Office so they could get their money faster. Yep. And every one of these college presidents from the historically Black colleges and universities, they got a photo op, all 47 of them got a photo op in the Oval Office with Donald Trump. They couldn't wait. And it made the cover of the Wall Street Journal. It was a big, big deal. And they were just so happy. And then the second big thing that he did is he rolled back the laws that Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden had pushed through with the Predator Act. They had the super predators. Remember that bill? Well, that they would incarcerate Black men and women, and they were in jail for life. Well, Trump came out with the First Step Act, which released thousands of these men and women who were under this oppressive law before, so they could get a second chance. Media crickets on that one.
Well, here's the irony. Nobody has been responsible for putting more Black people into prisons than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
It's true.
With the remember he bragged about if you get caught with even a small little bit of crack cocaine, you know, blah, 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 we're sending you to prison, da, da, da. That was Joe Biden. Who was the Attorney General of California that put all sorts of young Black men into prison for small amounts of marijuana? Yeah, Kamala Harris. Nobody has incarcerated more Black people than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in American history.
And it's funny, people still, what's the lack of a better word? They buy the bamboozle. You know, they've been bamboozled and they buy it.
I think people want to belong to a tribe. And once you join the tribe, it's very hard to get somebody out of a tribe. Yeah. And so you learn what the culture of the tribe is, you learn what the language of the tribe is, you learn what the values of the tribe are, and then you follow suit. And that's why, I mean, and I would say the same is true with the right. You know, I try to tell people I'm an honest conservative. If somebody shows me something that happened that was illegal or whatever, you know, I would say we need to, you know, kick that guy out of office, or we need to, you know, whatever, right? The left doesn't tend to do that, right? They oh no, I mean, what we're seeing going on in America today is just shocking.
It's astounding.
It's undeniable what Joe Biden has been up to for the last 40 years. It's undeniable. We have bank records, we have the LLCs, we have the phone calls, we literally everything. It's not speculation. We literally have everything. And it's only going to get worse, you know, as it continues to be revealed. By the way, I'm going to make a prediction. You can have me back on the show when this happens. Okay. If somebody handed me $1 million and said, "What you have to place this on one person being the candidate for the Democrats in 2024," I would put that $1 million on Gavin Newsom. The Democrats know that Biden's corrupt. They know that he's senile. He can't help being senile, but you can't put him in there for 4 more years. But they know that he's corrupt. And when I finally realized that the fix was in against Joe Biden was when the IRS whistleblower came out about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he did his first interview. Now, who would you expect an IRS whistleblower who was blowing the whistle on Joe and Hunter Biden? Where would you expect him to do his first interview? Fox,
Yeah.
Newsmax, something like that. It was CBS. And when I said, "Oh, they're letting the real, the mainstreamers go after him now," they're going to start chipping away. I have a feeling if I had to place $1 million bet, and I could only put it on one situation, I think they're going to keep Joe Biden in till about a week before the convention, and they're going to pull him out, and Gavin Newsom's going in, and they're going to run him. That's really what I believe. There's no other reason for Gavin Newsom to be trying to raise his level. He's running ads in Florida, and he's all over the country. He's doing big interviews, with Sean Hannity and these people, and so it's going to be interesting. The next 18 months are going to be really interesting.
They are. I'm really I'm looking forward to it. With gritted teeth. But I don't know about you, but when I was a kid and a young adult, I always stood proud in this belief that America, we weren't as corrupt as other countries and blah, blah, blah. And the exposure that's taken place over the last 6 to 10 years, I didn't realize we were just as corrupt as any other country.
And again, both sides.
Yeah, both sides.
There's a book by Peter Schweitzer, and if you're really interested in politics, you should read all of Peter Schweitzer's books. The first one was Clinton Cash. He wrote one called Secret Empires. And then the latest one is Red-Handed. And Red-Handed is about all the politicians who've been caught red-handed getting money from China. And in that book, and it's the most footnoted book I've ever read. I think there's like 20 pages of footnotes or something like that, small print. And he outlines how the Biden family has received $31 million that they could prove. And this when he wrote it 2 years ago. But he also goes after all the Republicans who do the same thing.
Yeah.
And, I think, I don't know if you remember this, but one time somebody asked Trump, "Why did you give Hillary Clinton $10,000 for her reelection?" He goes, "I'm from New York. I was buying a senator. I wanted access. I knew that if I gave her the money, she'd answer the phone when I called." Point blank, he laid out exactly how politics is done.
Yeah.
If you look at Warren Buffett, he invests in things that he can get help from senators and congressmen. That's why he's in the insurance business so big, is because he can get, he gives all these donations out to all these senators and congressmen, and they do the law that makes it work. And this is the way that it works. And that's part of our problem, the ability to buy a senator or buy a congressman.
Well, the Keystone Pipeline got killed mainly because of Warren Buffett, because they're moving on trains.
Now they're on trains.
I think it was like $2 billion worth of oil a year. So he was going to lose all of that because the Keystone Pipeline would have cut.
And he's one of the biggest investors in railroads and trains. Absolutely.
Yeah. Hello.
Absolutely. Everybody thinks he's a really great investor. I think less than that. I think he's really good at finding businesses that he can fund political advantages for.
Because all it took was a phone call, and Keystone Pipeline was dead. I always joke about this. We need a lobbyist now for the American people because we don't have one. We don't have representatives anymore. We really do not. So
that's true.
Chris, how do we get a hold of you? Where should we go?
ChrisWidener.com. Email is chris@chriswidener.com. You can find me on Amazon, Facebook, Chris Widener Speaker. Pretty easy.
Good. I've really been honored to have you on the show today. This is a refreshing conversation. But I'm going to go into the lightning round. I'm going to ask you 3 questions real quick, so we get to know you just a little bit better.
Okay, here we go. I'm ready for lightning round.
What is it about you that maybe we don't know about you?
What is it about me that maybe you don't know about me? I'm really good at poker. When I sold my company in 2009, I started playing a lot of poker. I played in World Poker Tour events and World Series of Poker a lot. I played poker all over the world. I love the game of poker because it's fun. It's a game, obviously. Yeah. It's a game where you sit around a table with 8 other people and you talk, and people of different backgrounds and races and religions and ethnicities and gender. And, you get to sit around at the World Series of Poker. If you're even remotely interested in poker, you need to go to the World Series of Poker, because you'll sit at a table with Europeans and Asians and you'll talk about everything. It's really, really quite fun. But there's skill, there's luck, there's strategy, there's reading people, there's just all sorts of things. So I love poker for what it takes to play it.
Oh, that's a great answer. So you're coming to Vegas, right?
I have been to Vegas hundreds of times for speeches and to play poker. So I love Las Vegas. I think Vegas is really cool because you could live in Vegas, and even if you didn't gamble, just the shows, and the food, like every major chef has a restaurant in Vegas. It's great weather. It gets hot in the summer, but you can go elsewhere if you want. But Vegas is a great city, even if you don't gamble.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me, well, why'd you move to Sin City after all these years on the East Coast? And I said, well, I don't go to strip clubs and I don't gamble. So I do love a good buffet. Hello, I'm from Pennsylvania. We call them smorgasbords. And I also love hiking up in the mountains. Yeah. It's breathtaking up here. Love the shows. I mean, the only other place you can just go, I'm literally, I'm a 20-minute walk from Fremont Street right now. Oh, you are? I used to live over in Henderson, and I was literally 20 minutes from downtown. I still am, from the Strip. And, I would go down to the Strip, and I would go to the same place all the time. I hate to say it. I would go to the Promenade there by the link where the Ferris wheel is, and go into some of those shops and everything. Then I go across the street to the Cosmo, to the private bars. I like a good glass of wine. Or
the Chandelier Bar at the Cosmo is the best. It's beautiful.
My
By
favorite.
The way, have you been to Secret Pizza in the Cosmo?
No, but I have been to Ghost Donkey, the secret bars. Yeah, I've been to Essex, and I forget what the other one is.
Well, I'm going to flip lightning round on you. I'm going to ask you, what's the best show in Vegas? Because I got my answer. What do you think is the best show in Vegas?
Ooh,
if you go to Vegas and you can only see one show, what show are you going to see?
Love. I like the Beatles. Yeah, I love the Beatles.
I've seen Love. I got to tell you, I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's pretty raunchy, but it is the funniest show I've ever been to. I've been to it repeatedly. In fact, it's the first night date I took Denise to when we went to Vegas. We went and saw Absinthe. Have you seen Absinthe?
Oh, wow. No, but I saw Atomic. That other one, the Atomic Western or whatever. Absinthe is.
I
got to check that out.
It's pretty raunchy, but everybody takes a hit in that one. So.
Good. I'll go to that one as well. A buddy of mine was a gymnast for Cirque du Soleil, and we were going to go see Zumanity, but they shut everything down for the pandemic. And so I was like, I wanted to see that. That one's a little raunchy too.
The founder of Cirque du Soleil, Guy Laliberté, is a big poker player.
No kidding.
Yeah, he plays poker. Yeah, if you look at high stakes poker on YouTube or something, Guy is in a lot of those shows. He plays very high stake poker. In fact, it was really interesting. He's in a hand one time, and it was hundreds of thousands of dollars. They were playing a cash game for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I can't remember who he was playing against, but they got all their money in. And he said to the guy, sometimes they'll actually do the remaining cards a couple times, and they'll split the pot based on who wins it. It's called running it twice or running it three times. These high stakes poker players, they like to do that because they know that they're going to get caught on the bad end sometimes. So they'll mitigate some of their variance by running it twice or running it three times. Wow. And I'll never forget, he looks at this guy. I wish I could remember who it was. He said, this is a lot of money for you. This isn't much at all to me. So I'd be happy to run it 4 times if you like. And he gave the guy 4 chances. And I think they ended up splitting the pot. They both got their money back. But I remember him saying, this is a lot of money for you. And it's not much money for me, because he's worth, $3 billion. And it was maybe $500,000 or something like that.
It reminds me of Christopher Walken in Pool Hall Junkies. Yeah. That's famous for the lion speech, but he goes, this is not a lot of money for me. Yeah, and I'm just like, that's what it reminds me of. It's like, this is a lot of money for you. My favorite speech always is, because if you're a leadership speaker, it's always like, do you ever watch those nature documentaries? The lion, he's hot. So I have a third question. And
what was the second question?
Wait. Oh, yeah.
I think we're on the second question.
Yeah, we're on the second question. Thank you for keeping me on point. What's your favorite memory?
My favorite memory. Boy, there's so many memories in my lifetime. I mean, obviously, marrying my wife in a vineyard in Italy is great.
Yeah, that's in the top.
I always joke and say, the highlight of my life was at 13 when I was in a ticker tape parade through downtown Seattle with the world champion Seattle Supersonics and stood on stage. Like, where do you go from there? That's pretty crazy. I remember the first time I spoke to a crowd of over 20,000 people. It was in Los Angeles. That's pretty good memory.
That is.
Lots of great memories with my kids and yeah.
Well, you're a great speaker. Yeah, I've watched you. And what makes you a great speaker is you're subtle. Some people come out on stage and they're very like, all right, here, and you can tell they're acting and they're doing it. You're just standing up there going, blah, 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 and you go.
I'm conversational. I like
exactly.
I'm conversational. Yeah.
And I watched you the first time I ever saw you. I was just like, damn, I need to learn that right there, because you were conversational. And like I said in the beginning, you were giving a speech about nothing, and yet it was about everything. Like, it was very deep principles. And so I enjoy. There's some speakers you enjoy watching and listening to the message,
right?
And you're one of those, my friend.
Oh, thank you, I appreciate that.
So I guess my final question is, what do you want your legacy? With everything you've done, what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I want my legacy to be that I loved people, that their life is better because they knew me or met me or were in business with me, and that's hard sometimes. You have business breakups and you have marriage breakups and you have those kinds of things, and life doesn't always go the way that you plan it to. But as a general principle, I want people to remember me fondly, not necessarily because I was a great speaker or I wrote great books, but that Chris the person was a good guy, not a perfect guy, but a good guy.
Yeah. That's a great way to close the show. Chris Widener, thank you so much for being on Awakened Nation, my friend. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate you having me on.
Sure. Hey, everybody, look up chriswidener.com. Also, pick up his book, The Art of Influence, Persuading Others Begins with You. It's fantastic. And also, I love this, Jesus, Master of Influence. Where do we get that?
Yeah, they can actually get that at Tome, T-O-M-E app, TOMEAPP.com, tomeapp.com/influence.
Fantastic. Honored to have you on the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You bet. Hey, everybody, tune in next week for another great guest, and take care until then.
Thank you so much for being a big part of the Awakened Nation movement. This is how you can help me and our extraordinary guests. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please share it out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And let's grow this movement by word of mouth. Our success will be because of you. Thank you, and see you next week.